Welcome, everybody. I'm J. Hart Ellis, and today I'm going to talk about Tales of Tribute in the Elder Scrolls Online. The deck building game, a lot of strategy involved with it. I really enjoy it. I want to give some basic tips and strategy to help people to get along so that they can win NPC matches, get rewards like house guests and furnishings, and hopefully rank up into Rubedite and actually play competitively. So we'll talk about the different types of cards here, the different patrons and when to use them, just some kind of basic tips. And I'm number one player on PCNA. You'll often find me up on top of the leaderboard or near that. I played lots of matches. I have some good insights here today. So I'm going to walk through just kind of my thought processes as I hop into an NPC match, talk about the board, what I'm looking at and looking for, and coming up with a strategy toward winning. So you can always check the cards in your collections or look up more on those. The patron selection is going to be a little bit different between NPCs versus a player match. I'm going to just go ahead and pick two cards that I like, two decks that I like, and then what I always like to do is assess the board state. So I am going first. I will count up how much coin I could potentially play. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That gives power. Your gold gives you coin, and your coin and your power are your resources that you can use to improve your deck and to get good cards and to try to progress toward 40 prestige or to flip patrons to get those all to favor you. I usually don't worry about that too much at the beginning, though. And then I'm also just going to take a quick assessment of the various patrons and how they proc. So it's 2 power to get a coin. It is to pay all of your coin to get a bunch of power. It is to pay 2 power to draw a card. That's very strong. And then sacrifice an action card in your hand to be able to just directly gain prestige. Now, I want to be building up my deck at the beginning instead of tearing it down, so this is definitely a late game thing. Can't really do this until I have power, and I'd only really want to be drawing if I have good cards anyway. Really, you can only use this once, and then you can't use it again, unless if your opponent uses it, so I'd really like to just keep that in reserve in case if I really need it or want to try to win. And then getting that extra coin, yeah, maybe that could be good early on. My favorite patron interaction at the beginning is treasury upgrades, where you sacrifice a card that you've played and generate a writ of coin, which gives 2 coin instead of 1. Very, very useful to use that early and often. These starting cards, you each start with 10 cards. You and your opponent gets 6 gold, as well as 1 of each of the suited cards. So we each have a green card, a purple card, a black card, and a yellow card. So these are your resources. They're really weak at the beginning, and you want to get stronger cards so that you can then get even stronger cards and snowball and build up until you can eventually get to 40. So you want to have a good mix of gold so you can buy better cards and hopefully eventually get some power along the way so that you can bank that to get toward 40. Any unused power at the end of your turn will be turned into prestige. And then there are a couple other ways to directly get prestige, like the Hallelujah patron interaction. So I would like to assess what all I can buy, and then thinking about whether these will improve my deck in the long run or not. So like this Grand Oratory is a contract action card. This will not be added to my deck. You can tell that it says contract action card. This is just a one and done. You buy that, and then your deck will not get any cards added to it, as opposed to like the scratch card where you buy that and it will then be added permanently to your deck, and every single time that you draw into it, that you get extra benefit from that. So thinking about permanently improving the deck versus temporarily just getting some benefit. So I'm assessing options. I have lots of options. I could go for this Grand Oratory to get some power to flip hunting early on, and then maybe my opponent wouldn't be able to do that for a while. Or I could just get like a really strong card like this Custom Seizure, or I could just do a coin upgrade. So I have lots of good options. I see this agent out here. Now, one thing to keep in mind early on is that you and your opponent really can only afford 4 to 5 cost cards at the beginning for the most part. So my opponent going second does get 1 extra coin to offset the first turn advantage. So will they be able to potentially get like a strong agent on the very first turn? Well, maybe they can, but I can't do anything about that. So I really like getting agents because they permanently get thrown on the field, and what then happens is your opponent has to deal with them. So this one has 3 health that they have to burn through, and that can be a real big bother, and so it can throw them off or cause them to expend resources or patron interactions just to deal with the agents, and then once it's killed, it will cycle back through and know how to deal with it again in a couple turns. So agents are really, really strong. I often like to prioritize agents if I can. Otherwise, I also see this currency exchange, again, at 7 cost, so it has really good coin and patron generation, but nobody can afford it for several turns until our decks are strong enough to be able to potentially afford that at 7. But for now, we're maybe getting 4 to 5 coin per turn, and that doesn't allow us to afford very much. I like the idea of getting custom seizure here because maybe I could just grab like a 6 cost card on the cheap. So have good options. Could go for the scratch. If I get the scratch and the other peck combo, I could even get that currency exchange. So can go slow and steady with this, kind of developing a strategy maybe. I'm going to go with custom seizure just because I feel like that will reliably get me some strong cards. And then I'll end my turn. And usually, especially against players, human players, want to play quickly, develop strategy on the fly, test things out, have fun with it. Every single match is going to play differently. And my NPC opponent is just burning for power with the contract action cards, not actually making their deck any stronger, and that will probably not work for them in the long run. And they have bought a card, and that has exposed Murder Crows, which is really pretty good for me. And then the fun thing about hunting is that you often get choices, so I can either get a coin or a power. Well, I can't buy anything with 1 coin, so I may as well bank a power. 1 out of 40 can often make a difference. And then I'll just kind of continue to talk about why I am doing what I'm doing and hopefully win this match. Contract agent card is like one of these, except it is once it's killed, then it's just removed from the game. So they're usually pretty good for the cost on them, but again, you only get the 1 turn benefit from it. So that one would allow me to remove weak cards from my deck, so you can improve your gold generation and power generation per turn by getting good cards added to your deck or by removing weak cards from your deck. So I really like the Red Eagle card for being able to destroy cards that are weak, and then you can more reliably get combos. So I already have 1 Crow card. I'll go ahead and get the Scratch card to continue to more reliably combo those, and if they combo properly, then I will be able to actually get some of the really expensive cards that are on the tavern at this point. Won't be able to this turn. One thing I always like to do is take an assessment of what I maybe have coming up. You can always click on your draw pile. You can also click on your opponent's. Like my opponent has 5 cards right now. I can actually see what's going to be in their hand. Nothing's really supposed to be a secret. If they had more cards in their deck, then I wouldn't be able to tell exactly which 5 they have. I can tell exactly how much coin they'll have. So they can only afford 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cost things this next turn, so I don't really have to be super paranoid about them getting a good 6 cost card or above. So I like the idea here of maybe getting some strong cards from my deck or removing weak cards. 6 cost with that contract agent sounds fantastic. I can go ahead and remove a weak card from my deck. Like this War Song, I really like to focus on gold generation early on instead of power, so I'm going to remove that War Song over a coin, and I can remove a card. Don't really want them to get good power generators so that they can't flip hunting. So just kind of thinking about different processes here. My thinking at this point is I could either Red Eagle, and I'd have a 50-50 chance of drawing a Crow card, and if that combos, that would be kind of nice. But I can kind of just get whatever I want to buy on the tavern anyway, just by gaining a power, flipping hunting, that will give me a coin, and then I have exactly 3. I can rag pick away another weak card, and I really at this point just want to consolidate my deck until I have nothing but good cards. And then when I have nothing but good cards, I'll have a good mix of coin and power and can continue to build up toward 40 prestige. So that will combo. Hopefully I get some extra oomph out of my agent here. Currency exchange is really fantastic for being able to have extra patron interactions, or I could just go with the House Embassy because it is a little bit more coin and potentially gives you extra good freebies, and if I get like free Crow cards or something like that, that could be pretty nice. Crows tend to combo very well with each other. Otherwise, I could draw a card. I have a lot of good interactions this turn. I think I like the idea of doing Red Eagle just because my deck is already pretty strong, and at this point that 2 power will probably give me on average good cards, or at least allow me to cycle my deck so I can get the combos more often. So keeping in mind what you really want to do is be able to play your good cards more and more and more, and if you're drawing through your deck more quickly, then that really helps. So I'm really torn between House Embassy and Currency Exchange. I'm going to go ahead and get the House Embassy just because it's a little bit more gold, and then thinking about removing additional weak cards from my deck. And the combo proc on the Elder Witch allows me to remove a card. What am I not wanting my opponent to get? What can they afford or not afford? I don't think I'm too worried in any case. I think I like the board state to be kind of expensive, so I'm going to just leave it as is. You don't always have to take the actions that it procs you to. Oftentimes, you don't necessarily want to, like, destroy a card. It's always up to with any of the things that you're proccing. So I can get an extra free crow card. That would be nice. Can destroy an extra card. And then at this point, I have options. I could put them within a patron check just by sacrificing a card. I could sacrifice a custom seizure or the Elder Witch, and I can't afford anything else for right now. I think I like the idea of potentially winning by patrons, even though it's a little cheesy against NPC, but NPCs don't tend to play very great, and you should be able to pretty reliably beat them. So I'm going to go ahead and not just win immediately. I kind of want to see my combos play out. So I'm going to just do an upgrade. And I wanted my yellow cards to potentially combo. So I'm just yellow and purple for now. Usually like to keep just to a couple of suits if I can. Might defensively buy a offsuit thing if I think that my opponent would benefit too much from it. Continue to get rid of weak card from my deck. They really should have dealt with the Elder Witch a long time ago. They could have flipped Crow to have done that, but they didn't. At this point, if I flip Hunting, I can get the Currency Exchange. And then continue to remove weak cards from my deck. That'd be fine. I could buy some nice cards, like 6 cost, but I'm going to just get the 3 cost one to continue to build on the strength they already have within the deck. Even though these are suited, they are relatively weak at this point. I'm going to remove that. So at this point, I'm just getting more and more crows, more and more patron interactions working out so far. And even though I exerted a lot of resources to get that Riddicoin, I'm thinking about maybe getting rid of it at this point. Or I could get rid of the Way of the Sword. I don't have any other green cards, so I may as well get rid of that. Any of the cards I have here will combo things, so I'm just going to go ahead and Red Eagle. And that will allow me to get some extra freebies, which is nice. More draw power. Gonna get rid of that Way of the Sword first. And the rid of the coin. And now I have very few cards. And I will just be able to win in a couple turns here. I have 19 coin, and this is where it gets fun. Sometimes you get a good combo, and then it's like, okay, I have lots of coin. I really just want to present good opportunities for myself to purchase, and then thinking about what my opponent might benefit from. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of clear things out. I have yellow cards. I don't really need green right now. And at this point, I can be more thinking about directly going toward 40. The Midnight Raid just gives power, but it kind of breaks my combo with a draw power. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and grab it anyway. With 6 coins left, I could still potentially get something half decent. And now at this point, I'm like, okay, if I buy anything, this isn't really helping to improve my deck at this point. Just based off of like the average of what my cards are at. And I don't really want to give my opponent like an in like an anti-agent card that could just be used against me. So I'm just going to leave the board state kind of expensive, even though, you know, it maybe is like, oh, I have 6 coin, I can continue to buy stuff. Well, no, maybe the best thing to do is just to hold off on it. And they've been able to get pretty high up on the prestige, but I'm going to, at this point, be able to do quite a lot. So I will acquire cards. Well, no, I don't want to acquire cards. I can remove cards first. One thing to do is kind of assess a proper order on things. So I don't really necessarily like any of these, so I'm going to remove cards first. Maybe give myself something better. Didn't really help that much, but that's okay. You can try to make RNG work in your favor. Thinking about a proper order to do things. What I could do at this point is I could actually just use this to get the House Embassy, because that will give me extra coin that I can use with the Crow. So I'm just going to go like full on with a big Crow flip this turn. And that will put me just over 40. Or I could even sacrifice a card to pad my lead a little bit. Whenever I'm sacrificing a card with Hallelujah, I often am considering doing the most expensive one. That will burst me over 40 the most, or I could get rid of like a contract agent, since my opponent might just be able to deal with it and then get no more benefit out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the House Embassy. It's done what it needed to, got me a lot of coin, got me some good freebies, and now I can turn it into prestige using this, and that should do it. Now what I'd like to do is just kind of go through. So this is a little bit of smattering of all different types of cards. Being adaptable with his strategy. I was originally hoping to just get like a lot of Crow cards, but ended up getting a little bit of a mix of things, but I was really able to whittle my deck down to nothing but strong cards, and that was really nice. And that even counted for a daily, so we'll get some extra rewards if I go turn that in. So what I'd like to do now would be just to kind of talk about each of the different patrons and when to use them. And you can have a lot of fun with it. You can kind of develop strategy on the fly, test things out, kind of guess what might come out, and see if you make a mistake or not. So lots of times with the competitive games, it's really about minimizing the mistakes that you make. It's not necessarily about making great choices so much as just not making the wrong choices. So neutral cards, treasury upgrade often helps. You want to get rid of the weakest cards in your deck, and especially if they are like the Pelon card that only gives power instead of coin. I would like to sacrifice this one or the Red Eagle card first, as opposed to the gold cards, if I happen to, if I am able to. Extra gold generation per turn will allow you to get more and more strong cards, and then that snowballs and snowballs and snowballs until you get a good mix of coin and power, and that will really help you to win or to deal with agents that are out there. And so there are a couple ways to deal with agents. I like to get agents, so oftentimes if agents come out onto the field, you want to have a counterplay. So either removing cards from the tavern to potentially reveal a Black Sacrament or an ambush can really help you to deal with agents and throw off your opponent. I tend not to like to buy things like blackmail or imprisonment early on, but these are really great for dealing with agents directly, or toward the end game, you can just try to burst to 40 power, or to try to catch up with your opponent. Harvest Season, really kind of weak at the beginning because it costs 2 coin, and on average at the beginning it's just going to draw you like a gold, so you're paying 2 to draw 1. That's not really fantastic until later on, where this will more reliably draw into combos, and you really don't want to leave this for your opponent most times, because your opponent could get combos from it, and the fact that it replaces itself with another card could reveal a good card underneath it for yourself to purchase. So I always like to start my turn by buying Harvest Season if I can. And then Rag Picker, again, removing a weak card from your deck to consolidate your deck to make it stronger on average. Remove a weak card from your deck, and then it's pretty good for the cost too. Tithe is really expensive, especially early on at 3, to just get an extra patron interaction, considering that you still have to pay the cost of the patrons. But one nice little combo I have early on is if there's nothing else on the deck, on the tavern, and there's a Tithe, I like to get a Tithe with 7 coin and do 2 treasury upgrades. So 3 for the cost of the tithe, plus 2 treasury upgrades will allow me to upgrade twice, and that will permanently improve the coin generation of my deck. So that's a nice little thing, and these are neutral cards that you'll come across with every single match, so it's good to be a bit more well-versed with these cards in particular. As far as the suited decks, these sometimes have balance changes. I don't want to go into specific cards too much on these, but let me talk a little bit about each of the patrons and kind of when to use those. So Amalexia allows you to look at cards of your opponent's deck and then move one of them into the discard pile. A couple of things with this is I'd usually rather be doing that treasury upgrade, and so if your opponent has put all their eggs in one basket and you can tell that they have a good card coming up, then you can use this to move it into their discard. The one tricky thing with that is don't fall for a trap, which is to remove a card into their discard only for them to allow them to directly refresh it into their hand. So I've seen that happen, so be careful with that little anti-combo. So I tend not to like to do this unless if I just happen to have the extra patron interaction at the end and I can Amalexia. That can work out, especially since it's pretty cheap overall compared to other interactions. Hunting, I really like to have this favoring me if I can, but barring that, I tend to like to favor doing the treasury upgrade still. It does cost 2 power, and oftentimes you just get into a battle of flipping this back and forth, so, which is kind of important, because if your opponent has it favored, then they're getting an extra gold each turn that you're not getting, and so I tend not to like to flip this until my opponent has already flipped it, and then try to get some power into your deck so that you can flip this and have it favor you. And sometimes your opponent will have no power and you'll permanently have 1 extra coin per turn. That usually makes a difference between winning and losing. A lot of Tribute is about marginal advantages, where you're just trying to eke out like an extra half coin per turn or so, based off of the strength of your deck, and that really makes a difference in the long run. And so Duke of Crows, again, you can only really flip this one, and then it's unusable. You usually don't have a lot of matches where this gets triggered a lot, but I usually only like to flip this if I have a pretty good turn and can knock out some opponent agents by getting a lot of power and then just killing all the agents that they have, or if I get like maybe 12 or more coin in a per turn, and I don't really think that might happen again for a while, I'll just be like, okay, I'm just going to make a good chunk toward 40. So I usually like to get up to about, 35 or so, and then I could maybe just like sacrifice a card, or otherwise just get over the line toward 40 prestige, or just burst through and I suddenly go from like 30 prestige to 60 prestige, just by doing a really, really good crow flip. So that's often what you're doing. You're building up your crows to be able to then just have a really nice coin generating turn that you can then convert directly toward victory. And then Halalu, usually only like to use this toward the late game when I'm directly trying to get to 40. Or sometimes I will have bought a good card on the tavern, and then I don't have any coin left to actually do like a treasury upgrade, so what I will do is sacrifice like a relatively weak card in my deck. Oftentimes that will be like another Halalu card, or maybe like a 2-cost card. I usually don't like to get very many of the 2 to 3 cost cards. I like to kind of keep it more consolidated with the 4+ cost cards. So if I just kind of have to pick up like a relatively weak card early on, then I'll just sacrifice it. It allows me to remove relatively weak cards from my deck, and hey, you get a little prestige along the way with it as well, which is nice. Hermaeus Mora, you've paid 3 power, which is kind of a lot to give you and your opponent something from the tavern, an action card from the tavern, and that can be good for building up combos that you already have while also diluting your opponent's deck. So I usually like to do this in a way that is a good thing for me and maybe a not so good thing for my opponent. Otherwise, I don't tend to touch this very much. Like if I already have a couple crows and my opponent doesn't, then if I give each of us a plunder, well, for my opponent it's quite neutral, but for me it's quite good. So Otherwise, you can usually use this to more reliably get combo cards. Though at 3 power, it's very expensive. This is very situational. Don't tend to like to do it too often. Caloris just pays for a coin to knock out an agent, so if you ever are just stuck, it's kind of expensive at 4, but it definitely is reliable for knocking out one agent, noting that you can only do one agent, not more than one, and so if your opponent has lots of agents, you might want to have a better counter strategy. And then otherwise, Caloris just does a lot of tossing, and what this is great for is to be able to cycle through your deck to effectively bypass weak cards in your deck, and just be able to play your combos and line those up very well. One thing with Caloris cards is oftentimes you want to toss, thinking about the order on things, toss and then draw. So, like, let's say you play one toss card, and then you could just directly draw it with, like, the Dreaming Cave here, and then that will, you know what you're going to get for the most part. So you can reliably proc combos just by thinking about the turn order on things. And Rajin generates a bewilderment card for your opponent, and that bewilderment card is garbage. It's basically a dead card that your opponent has to deal with, and it can really trip them up, can slow down the game a little bit, buy you some time, break up your opponent's combos, and at 3 coin is pretty good. Often I'm on the fence about whether I want to do a treasury upgrade for myself if I have 3 coin versus doing Rajin, and it's often going to be situational based off of, like, is my deck going to cycle? Am I going to benefit from a treasury upgrade before my opponent gets a bewilderment that they have to deal with? So, if I ever play Rajin, I will usually give my opponent a couple of these. Not early, but maybe 4 or 5 turns in, I'll do a couple of bewilderment. About every other turn, maybe. So, some really good cards. This Grand Larceny is really fantastic to get. Thinking about the very first turn, whether or not you can even get 5 coin. That's where patron selection at the beginning can really come into play. Thinking about what you are getting for 4, 5, or 6 cost at the beginning of the match. And then otherwise, Rajin doesn't necessarily have very good power generation, or at all. So you want to use Rajin as a way to gain gold to then, or gain coins so that you can then buy other cards from other suits to eventually progress toward victory. So most all decks by themselves have kind of weaknesses. I'll go through that too. Red, if you like just go all in on one deck, it might not work out. Red Eagle just allows you to pay 2 power to draw a card. This isn't very great at the beginning unless if it will allow you to potentially cycle your deck and get a combo, even like a second or third hand. And otherwise, if you have a good sense of what you're going to be drawing, that can be really good. But you're using your 1 interaction per turn to draw a card instead of improving your deck, so you better be getting something pretty good to combo that's allowing you to buy something specific on the tavern that will improve your deck. So use this sparingly, and 2 out of 40 is still a pretty good chunk. That's 5% of the way toward victory. Pelin Power is to pay 2 power to put an agent on top of your deck. I usually only like to do this if I then have a way to directly draw the agent, because the agents are usually pretty strong. So if you can draw a card and then maybe proc draw a combo with like Rally, then you can like put a Banneret on top of your deck and then draw it with Rally. Then that can be really great because you immediately get the strong agent onto the field. But again, 2 power is kind of expensive. I don't tend to like to use Pelin much at all. I usually rather be focusing on other patrons, and it can be kind of tricky to actually win by patron victory if you have Pelin in the mix. So Orgnum is to just generate power based off of how many cards you have in your deck. I don't tend to like to flip this. I'd usually rather be building up my deck or just doing treasury upgrades if I can, and so I don't tend to like to flip this very much. But once it's unfavored, it's actually the easiest to pay for it. It's only 1 coin to gain 2 power, and that's pretty reliable for dealing with agents that are out on the field, or you can continue to just build up your own deck and then just pay 1 coin instead of a lot, like 3 that your opponent has to pay. And then Druid King is about paying 2 power to remove 2 cards from the tavern, so you could either end your turn if in case of your opponent has like really good options, and you're like, oh dang it, I played all my cards and I left them with really good cards. Well, I'm going to remove them from the tavern using the Druid King. So now they have hopefully worse options. Sometimes you remove a card and the exact same card pops up. That's always fun. Or thinking about how this can potentially generate the Chimera card, which is a very strong agent, which is here. If you just generally this passively, if you get like a super combo with Druid King, 4 or 5 combo could generate this, and then that can be really great. So sometimes, just for the sake of fending this off, I will just flip Druid King and remove no cards from a tavern, just so that my opponent is going to be less likely to get the Chimera, or maybe a couple turns down the road, I could potentially get this. So that's pretty good. Otherwise, 2 power is kind of a lot. If you're starting a turn with lots of coin, then maybe you start by removing 2 cards from the tavern just to give yourself more options. And then otherwise, this is just really about getting good cards in your deck, thinking about how they go along with each other, and just trying different things out. And they will probably be adding more patrons in the future, and so I would feel like a lot of these things are kind of universal as far as just general gameplay. Start by getting some good 4 or 5 cost cards, build up, try to get some good 6 and 7 cost cards, and then once your deck is kind of in a strong state, thinking about how you're actually going to get over the line to get to 40 prestige and to get there before your opponent, and to deal with threats that your opponent might be throwing out at you. So that's a lot to take in, and there's certainly a lot to learn and to discover as you play Tribute. I think that these will be good tips for being able to at least beat NPC matches, or hopefully if you get enough wins, you can get to Rubedite in the ranked matches, and hey, you can try to best me on the PCNA Tribute leaderboard. That'd be fantastic. I feel like it's really rewarding if you've played other deck building games, and I love Tribute. If you've played other strategy games or games that have RNG or statistical elements to them, I really feel like there's a lot of statistics within Tribute. You're like, okay, what card do I want to remove from the tavern? What am I likely to have pop up to replace it? And so you're always trying to optimize a logical order. Like, okay, I have these different options, but would it be best if I bought this one or this one first? And thinking about the order of how all of the cards play out with each other. So there's a lot to figure out with it, and you're playing fast, and you might miss something, or you might regret something, or maybe you really open up something for your opponent. But never give up. I would say never give up. One thing is you can turn things around. You might get a nice combo, or maybe your opponent will go off the rails and just start buying weird stuff that they shouldn't be buying. That's the number one mistake I see people make, is that people will just start buying things because they can, and they ruin their deck a lot of the time because they have like a pretty good combo going on, and then they dilute it by buying too much, and then they don't get to their good cards as much. So try to resist the temptation to buy stuff just because you can. So that was a lot to take in, just some thoughts and some insights, and I'll be playing Tribute on my twitch.tv/jhartellis channel and uploading more things here on YouTube. So have fun with it and stay spicy, and good luck at the Tribute table.